The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 115. Cooperation and Confabulation. "Dad's potions lab is just down here," Tonks said, waddling a bit with each step. "Tell me what you need." He looked at her doubtfully. "Are you sure you should be walking around and making potions? Isn't it dangerous?" "You're not in here making mustard gas, right?" Tonks asked him appraisingly. "Mustard gas? Is that some kind of sauce?" he asked uncertainly. "No," she said firmly. "Let's focus. I am perfectly safe being in here with you whilst you brew. What do we need?" "Wigan tree, arnica oil, sage, rosemary, nettles, bezoar, rue, and ashwinder eggs," Draco replied. "And I need the blood from this wand. It's mine and my mother's." Tonks drew in a quick breath. "Oh, you're making a talisman?" "I hope I am. And I hope it will be in time. Can you crush the bezoar into a fine powder?" Draco instructed. He heated the distilled water to brew the nettles, sage, rosemary, and rue. Andromeda, who arrived a moment later, was put to work crushing the wigan tree bark. Lupin came in and took over the herb brew, muddling the nettles whilst Draco performed the precise stirring movements required. Tonks added in the bezoar and the arnica, and Andromeda the wigan tree and ashwinder eggs. When it was time, Draco used a bit of the solution to clean the two bloods from the wand. The entire solution turned silvery clear. Into this he dropped his coin that he used to communicate with Narcissa. The coin turned briefly red, the edges turning molten in the intense heat, then back to gold. The liquid solution that the coin had been dropped into had vanished. "It's done," breathed Andromeda. "How do we know if it works?" asked Tonks. "We don't," replied Draco and Lupin together. A couple of hours later, Draco was lying in bed in one of his aunt's guest rooms. His superficial wounds from the chandelier had been healed quickly by Andromeda. Draco had no doubt that she was likely as good a healer as Ted had been. His mind raced over the events of the day, alternatively worried primarily about his mother, but also Hermione and her friends, the elves involved, even his birds, left behind in the haunted mansion. It felt laughably surreal that all of them could have escaped unhurt. His mark had burned less than an hour after he'd arrived. Lord Voldemort was summoning his army. He assumed that the Dark Lord knew by now where he stood, seeing as he had not returned to Malfoy Manor. It had been such a long day, and yet he could not sleep until he spoke with Hermione. He had sent a message asking if she was all right within minutes of arriving at Surrey, and whilst the handkerchief had cooled, indicating that she had seen his words, she had not replied other than to say, "Safe." Now he lay in bed, looking at the handkerchief, glamoured so that it no longer appeared to be blood-stained and dirtied. He marvelled at everything that it had been capable of doing. These tiny scraps of cloth, something he'd once thought of as relics of a bygone generation, had become a lifeline to him. He and Hermione had used them to clean sweat and blood, as blankets and plates, to share secrets and words of love, and now to protect each other from grievous harm. The handkerchief warmed in his hand. "Harry, Ron, and I are safe. We are at Bill and Fleur's house, somewhere near Tinworth, on the coast. The goblin Griphook is recovering. Mr. Ollivander is here as well. He's very weak, Fleur says. And Luna and Dean are here, and safe. Dobby got everyone out of the cellar before he came to help us." He exhaled a long breath that he felt as though he'd been holding for hours, and answered, "I'm glad to hear it. I was so scared that everything was going to go to hell there for a moment." Draco thought back to those that she'd said were safe. He asked, What about Dobby?" There was a long moment before her reply came. "Dobby died. Harry said that Bellatrix threw her knife at them as they disapparated. When they got here, it had struck Dobby." "No. No. No." Hot, surprisingly quick tears prickled his eyes. The knife that he had changed the trajectory of to avoid Potter had killed Dobby. It was impossible. Unreal. Draco inhaled sharply, exhaling a small, ragged sob. How could he have let this happen? He lay there in stunned silence for a long while, until a new message appeared. "Draco, are you all right?" He gathered himself to reply. "Can I see you?" It was well after 1 o'clock in the morning now. Draco snuck quietly downstairs to go out the front door. Hermione was figuring out a way to innocuously get out of the cottage and walk down to the ocean nearby. He would apparate to her once she had dipped her handkerchief in the ocean water. There was a light on in the kitchen. He was surprised to find Andromeda sitting at the table, drinking a cup of tea. "Are you leaving so soon?" Andromeda asked with a half-smile and a cocked eyebrow. Draco sighed in resignation at having been caught. "I was hoping to go and meet Hermione, and check on her. Is that all right? I don't mean to cause any problems for you, though, so I understand if—" "It's quite all right, Draco. I completely understand. I was only wondering why you didn't simply apparate from your room." The witch tilted her head questioningly. "I assumed the wards—" "The wards allow true, loyal family, by blood or by marriage, in and out, just as they did at Malfoy Manor," his aunt said. "Oh," was all Draco could manage at first. As a member of an old wizarding family, Draco fully understood what it meant to be allowed inside of a home's wards freely. He flushed, overcome anew with emotion. It had been quite the day. And something about the whole idea of wards seemed to snag in his brain, as though he wanted to stop and pick it apart, to examine it more closely. Befuddled, he sat down across from his aunt, unable to meet her eyes because of the emotions he was afraid he might find there. Finally, he gathered himself enough to say, "I can't express how much I appreciate that." "And I've been meaning to tell you how much I appreciate you, Draco," his aunt said kindly. "What you did for Ted, for Nymphadora, back in Hogsmeade, for Hermione, today and last summer." I couldn't save him," Draco said, horrified to hear his voice crack with tears. He swallowed hard and tried again. "I wanted to go with Ted, fight them off, disapparate with him. The wards in the village would have allowed me through, I think." "But you don't know if they would have allowed him to go with you. He or you both could have been splinched. And besides, Nymphadora told me that he ordered you to stay behind and see that she got home safely. You did what he asked. You did what he would have done in the same situation. You did everything right." Andromeda lifted a handkerchief to dab at her eyes. Draco could not help but feel that if he had done everything right, Ted might have been sitting here at the table with them. Andromeda spoke again. "I talked with Narcissa. Her talisman worked. She, Bellatrix, Lucius, and Greyback were all tortured, but she was unhurt by any of it." Draco felt a relieved, giddy grin spread unchecked across his face. "Oh, thank Merlin. I sent her a message, but I don't think she's read it yet." "She may have already been asleep. Apparently, acting as though you are being tortured is quite exhausting. I am surprised Hermione is still awake, to be honest." Andromeda smiled. "It's probably just pure adrenaline at this point." Draco chuckled. "I'm a bit surprised that Pettigrew avoided the Cruciatus, seeing as it was his wand that facilitated their escape from the cellar." "Pettigrew is dead. Pym found him in the cellar. He was strangled by his own silver hand, it appears." Andromeda sipped her tea. Draco mulled over this bit of information. It was not surprising, he supposed. The hand was a rare bit of magic, made by one of the most evil minds to exist. It stood to reason that, if Pettigrew failed so miserably at a simple task, to overpower two scared and unarmed teenagers, that he would suffer the consequences. Draco shook his head. The handkerchief grew heavier in his pocket. He could feel the dampness seeping through his shirt. She had reached the ocean. "Why don't you get going? You do not want to keep your witch waiting. Your mother will come by tomorrow to check on you," said Andromeda. Draco rose to his feet and said his goodbyes to his aunt, turning on the spot. He landed with a splash, knee-deep in the ocean. He looked all around. It was only a quarter moon, so everything was rather dark. Hermione stood in the starlight, gazing up at the vast expanse above her, wrapped in what looked like a borrowed dressing-gown. He splashed up to her, and she raised her eyes to meet his. He could see glazed tears upon her cheeks. He took her in his arms, holding her tight to him, assuring himself that she was all right. "Harry is just on the other side of these dunes. He's digging Dobby's grave. He has refused to use magic, and he wants to be alone." Draco understood. Being able to lose yourself in something physical, something laborious, when everything around you is going to shit, it was helpful at times. Draco recalled all of the long summer swims, the hard Quidditch training sessions, the intense workouts in his room at home and in classroom 4 at school. When your body was tired, it was easier to clear your mind. "Here, let's sit." Draco transfigured his handkerchief into a blanket, spreading it out upon the sand and small pebbles. He added a cushioning charm, and they sat. Hermione transfigured her own glamoured handkerchief into a blanket to wrap themselves in, whilst Draco dried his trousers and shoes. "I'm so glad you're safe, and I'm so sorry that you had to go through all of that. What happened? How were you found?" he asked. "The taboo. We were listening to the wireless. Harry got carried away and said—" Draco swore and exhaled deeply. Fucking Gryffindors and their stupid bravado. He shook his head a bit, though. The moronic bravado that had put his witch in danger was the very same courageous bravado that had gotten her out of danger. "I'm so relieved that everyone was able to get out of there. I'm so sorry about Dobby, though. He was a good elf. He did not deserve this." "None of us did," she said simply. "So, can you explain about whatever it is you did? Why wasn't I able to feel her curses?" He told her quickly about the talisman potion, and how he had used the handkerchiefs with their commingled blood as the object. "I was even able to do the same for my mother after I left. She gave me her wand. It was covered in both of our blood, from the chandelier cuts, you see. When I got to Andromeda's house, we made the potion again, for her, using our coins." Hermione looked slightly stunned. "You said we made the potion. Who was we?" "Myself, Andromeda, Tonks, and Remus." She swore softly under her breath. "And you made the first one with Luna, Ollivander, and 2 house elves. Don't forget about Blaze. Apparently it was his potion idea to begin with. He was keeping me updated on the status of it whilst it was being brewed." "Blaze was at your house for the holiday?" she asked in bewilderment. "No, he had a coin to speak to Luna, and I had a coin to speak to him. He was the go-between, but he's in Italy right now. Why are you asking all of this?" Draco chuckled. "I'm just trying to wrap my brain around the fact that a Slytherin worked with 2 Ravenclaws, 2 Slytherins, 2 house elves, 3. Dobby brought me back my handkerchief after it was all done. Okay, 3 house elves, a Gryffindor, and a Hufflepuff to make these potions." Draco went through the list quickly in his head, then turned a horrified look on Hermione. Who is the Hufflepuff? Tonks! What? I just assumed... well, I mean, with her... you know, and her... Draco spluttered. Finally, he stopped. A Hufflepuff? Are you quite sure? Yes, quite certain, Hermione replied, dryly. Well, colour me gobsmacked. Draco stared up into the vast night, marvelling at this small bit of news. They laughed quietly together as they lay there. She ran her fingers over his chest lightly and said, I'm just amazed we were able to disapparate through the wards. I was convinced we wouldn't be able to leave. Until you encouraged me to go, I hadn't even thought to try. I thought the wards were limited in all of those old pureblood households. There it was, that snag again. The wards had dropped to allow Voldemort to apparate in, that much was true, but it still wouldn't have allowed a non-Malfoy to leave. How had she left? You're right, he said slowly. I suppose it makes sense that Dobby was able to come in and out. He was technically freed, but his elfin magic is still recognized by the wards. What I don't understand is how Weasley and you... At this, Draco stopped speaking, his senses floored by the realization. Weasley was not and would never be recognized by the wards of Malfoy Manor as a Malfoy. That meant that... Oh my God, he breathed, his arms gathering her even closer. He could feel his magic surging through his body in a state of euphoric amazement. The manor... it recognized you, my... He could feel Hermione still, then her head against his chest tilted slightly in confusion. What do you mean? The wards only allow for a family member by blood or by marriage to enter and exit the home via apparition, Draco said in wonder. But then how... Hermione began, but then broke off. Draco, are you trying to say... He sat up, turning his upper half to look down at his beautiful witch. The other half of his heart, his everything, his. She was his. And it turned out his house knew this as well. Hermione, I love you so much, with everything in my heart, in my soul, in my magic, and with everything I possess. I know you think we're too young for such bonds, but be certain that, for me, there can be no other, either now or in the future. I will always choose you, and the wards of my house only confirmed that for me today. She smiled beautifully up at him. Draco, I feel that way too. I love you. She surged up at him then, at the same moment that his lips came down to meet hers. Their pain, their terror and heartache of the day seemed to melt and fuse together into something new and fierce, something that bound them just as strongly as the handkerchief talismans and soul bonds of ancient bloodlines past. A few whispered privacy spells later, their kisses turned white-hot and hungry as they lay together. Tenderly they made love to each other, their magic combining and weaving together seamlessly. With and without words, they gave each other promises, for now, for the future, for always. Afterwards, they lay together in each other's arms, drowsy and sated in a way that would have seemed impossible mere hours before. Just as Draco was nearly about to drop off to sleep, Hermione turned to look at him, surprised. Wait, you left the manor? Does this mean... do they know? About you not being loyal? Does you know who know? What about Bellatrix? He sighed and closed his eyes, lying back to stare up at the stars overhead. I assume so. Just after you and Weasley left, Potter was disapparating with Goblin and Dobby. Bellatrix, She threw the knife at them. It was aiming dead center, right at Potter. I didn't have a wand, and you know my wandless magic is rather weak. I waved my hand at it, at the knife, just to move it off course, so that it wouldn't hit him, or it might just glance off. He screwed his eyes shut, unable to continue. Small tears trickled out of his eyes, collecting in his ears before he could wipe them away. "Oh, Draco," Hermione said, her own voice tearful. "Dobby." "Dobby," he repeated heavily. She laid her head upon his chest, holding herself tightly against him, curling one leg up to his waist. "I know it won't make you feel any better, but Dobby would have likely made the same choice if it was between himself and Harry." Draco could say nothing. She was right, of course. Dobby was selfless. He always had been. Hermione had told him about Dobby's actions in their second year at Hogwarts, and he had seen it for himself during 5th and 6th years. House elves weren't sorted into school houses, but if they had been, Dobby's tie would have been obnoxiously red and gold. It's just such a feeling of powerlessness, you know? That's 4 times now that someone has died because I didn't act, or I didn't do enough, or I waited too long to do anything.
What do you mean?
Hermione sat up a bit to look him in the eye. Dumbledore, Ted, Dobby, and I never told you about this, but there was another wizard, a young boy. His name was Joel.
Do you mean Joel Willingham?
She asked sharply. Draco hung his head. You remember him? From school, I suppose.
No, Draco, from you.